and they hold our trunk above the ground. It also has protective function. The skull helps protect the brain. The ribs help protect the lungs, for example. The bony sticks that make the leg bones, for example, the thigh bone is a bony stick, and then the lower leg is two bony sticks, and we have muscles attached to them. And when the muscles contract, they shorten, and that moves those sticks around, and that gets us moving around in the world. We call that locomotion. Bone also stores calcium, and we need calcium in the blood in very, very exact concentrations, not too much, not too little. Because calcium in the blood is needed for many, many chemical processes, or calcium in the body is needed for many, many chemical processes. For example, nerve impulse or heart contractions needs calcium to make them happen. And those are vital. If we don't have those, never mind, we don't need to try to be alive. It also stores fat inside long bones. And then inside the bones also, on the inside, it makes all type of blood cells. And we have this term there, you see that term marrow. Marrow is the inside of the bone. We got the inside of the long bone is yellow marrow, that's for the fat. And then we also have red marrow in different types of bone, like the hip bone, for example. And the red marrow makes all the different blood types. Good. Bone has excellent blood supply. That means we have the nutrients that come in and make it healthy and can remodel. No, doesn't need to be healthy, but it can make it remodel nicely and fast that way. It is covered in a sort of a stocking thing, in a membrane thing called a periosteum. And that helps the bone heal, and it also helps the blood vessels guide into the bone area, for example. When we look at the composition of bones, bone is very dynamic. We have cells, and the cells constantly change the composition of the bones. For example, when we have physical pressure put on the bones, we have to put more calcium in it. We take that from the blood, where we also have it because we can eat it, goes into the blood, and we can put it into the bone. We can take it away from the bone again if we need it in the blood, but if we need a strengthened bone, we will put some of that in the bone. We won't pee that stuff out. We'll use that for the body. And when we don't do anything physical, and we don't load the bone under gravity, then we will lose that volume and the bone will get less strong. So we have different cells that do different tasks. We have osteoblasts, and osteo refers to bone. And blasts refers to the fact that it is an immature cell that makes a lot of the extracellular matrix, the bony stuff, the calcium stuff. So that builds bone. The osteoblasts builds bone. I always visualize like it blasts material out of itself. It makes bone. Then we have the osteocyte. And the osteocyte are mature cells that live in little houses inside bone, and they maintain the bone. And then we got the osteoclasts. And the osteoclasts are cells that remove bone cells. They're not removing bone cells, they're removing the calcium. They break down the calcium and put it in the blood when the blood needs it. Remember, bone is a reservoir for calcium. So we put it in, we can take it out. We build most of that reservoir during the growing years. A lot of that is during the teenage years. And then we can use it up as we age. But if we use more than what we have, we deplete that reservoir over time. So if we didn't build a good reservoir at first, we don't have as much, so we deplete that reservoir, and that makes brittle bones. And that's called osteoporosis. And so it is very important to prevent that, to have a good diet when we grow up. That means no Coke and not too many hamburgers, because that stuff leaches, that stuff carries the calcium out. Vegetables, green leafy vegetables, have a lot of calcium, so that would be a good thing to eat. And then we can keep the bones also strong by doing weight-bearing exercises like walking or hiking. All right, so those two osteoclasts. And then besides the cells, we have the extracellular matrix. And what that is fibers and the ground substance. And the fibers is collagen fibers that keeps the bone flexible and also keep it resisted to stretching and to twisting. So that sort of helps it to stay flexible, but it resists that flexibility. And so if we lay down the calcium in certain patterns, we can make a very strong sort of a fiberglass meshwork construction. And then besides that, we have the inorganic salts. And that's mostly our calcium salts that make the bone very hard and resisted to compression. When we look at a typical long bone, well, a typical bone, when we describe a bone, it's a long bone, like an arm bone that's depicted here, an upper arm bone. And the bone then has a long middle section, and that's called a diaphysis. And it has two ends, and those are known as the epiphyses. And in between the two, we have that metaphysis there, and that is an area that holds the epiphyseal plate. And that is an area in the growing bone where the bone grows in length. So that's a place where we have a little, it's not all bony, there's some cartilage. We'll talk about that in a minute. We have two types of bone. We have compact bone, and that is very strong, solid, dense bone that has all the spaces filled with material. And so it makes it very heavy, but it creates a smooth appearance and it works it very, very strong. So we have that kind of bone on the outside of the bone, where we want to have a smooth looking bone. And also heavily we find that in the diaphysis, in the midsection of bone. It's composed of lamellar bone, densely packed lamellar bone. We'll talk about that lamellar bone in a moment. And then the other type of bone is spongy bone, or also trabecular bone. And we find that in inner layers of bone, but also a lot of that we have in the bony ends, because the bony ends get a little thicker. And if they were filled with bone all completely, that would make it very, very heavy. So we have, instead of that, we have tiny tubes that are the small little parts, bony units that build and orient themselves according to stress and sort of build a scaffolding that carries the stressors that have to pass through the bone along and make it very, very strong, but also very, very light for its strength. The Eiffel Tower is structurally built or modeled after spongy bone. So that's a very, very interesting construction. That brings us to the osteon. The osteon is the smallest unit where we can study bone. A subunit. And it's small, it's round, it's about 1 centimeter tall. And it's composed of two things. We have spirally arranged collagen fiber sheath. You see that in the picture on the right. Those are like making this collagen, making like this fiberglass meshwork type construction. And then in between those sheaths, we have the inorganic calcium salts. And so again, that whole construction makes it very strong and still flexible. Inside those sheaths, we have little houses, little lacunae, and osteocytes live in those. And small little channels connect those little houses, so they're not, all lonely all the time, and we call them canuliculi. And a haversian canal is a middle center canal, like if you think of it, the trunk of a tree type thing. The center of the trunk of the tree has a canal, and we have blood vessels and artery in the vein going up and down those. And then Volkmann's canal, in a compact bone where these osteons, these compact units, are right next to one another. A Volkmann canal is a connecting canal that's in a right angle that connects the different osteons together so they all can talk with one another. And the blood vessels, the nutrients, can go in and out of all of those different ones.